Good morning, everyone. Great to have you on, viewing us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as participating directly via Zoom. I am Karolina Zbytniewska, the editor-in-chief at EURACTIV Poland, and I have a pleasure and honor to host this very timely discussion entitled German Presidency in the European Union Council. Can Germany make the post-corona EU great again? The debate has been organized by EURACTIV Poland and co-organized by our great partner, Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Poland. After 2 rounds of questions, I will also ask our listeners, our viewers, to ask their own questions via Facebook, Twitter, and Zoom. I will be really grateful for this, for our panelists. And please, if you can also write to whom would you like to address your question. Okay, so now I would like to welcome and introduce our distinguished speakers. And our guests on Zoom, please, if you can unmute yourself, mute yourself. Now I would like to welcome, so again, introduce the speakers. First, let us welcome David McAllister, a German politician and member of the European Parliament. He is a member of the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, part of the European People's Party, so EPP. And David McAllister chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee at the European Parliament since 2017. Welcome, Mr. McAllister.
Good morning, dzień dobry.
Good morning, dzień dobry. Our second speaker is Professor Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, a political scientist and sociologist. She is a professor of political science at the Warsaw University, and also she is a member of Team Europe, a group of experts that is associated with the European Commission. And last but not least, Ambassador Jan Truszczyński, Chief Negotiator of Poland's accession, this will be a long one, Chief Negotiator of Poland's accession to the European Union, afterwards the first Under-Secretary of State, then Secretary of State in the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Moreover, Mr. Truszczyński was the ambassador of Poland to the EU in Brussels. He was also the Director General at the European Commission at the DG Education and Culture. Now, along with Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, he is also a member of Team Europe. So again, welcome, and maybe let's get down to the presidency business, complicated as it is. But so we will start with Mr. McAllister. Together for Europe's recovery is the English motto of German presidency. I prefer, though, the German version that looks like a wordplay with Donald Trump's Make America Great Again. Gemeinsam Europa wieder stark machen, meaning make Europe strong again. So my first, quite wider question is, what is the German plan for Europe? What are the priorities of the presidency? How to make the post-corona Europe great again?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure participating in this panel debate. The presidency of the European Union is always an enormous challenge, and it doesn't matter if you're a small, a medium-sized, or a larger country. So it's always a challenge. This presidency, of course, will be a very particular challenge, and the German presidency will be very much different than what was originally planned. The expectations here in Brussels are very high. I would say in some fields they're simply too high, because you cannot solve so many issues which haven't been dealt with for many, many years in 6 months. So the German presidency will set priorities, and the presidency itself is always obliged to cooperate with the Commission and also with the President of the European Council. Now, you already referred to the title of the German presidency. I agree with your analysis that I also prefer, in this case, the German title more than the English translation, which was chosen. Gemeinsam Europa wieder stark machen. The German federal government has presented the plan on 25 pages. You're asking about the priorities. Well, if you look at the table of contents, it names 6 specific fields. The first one is Europe's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The second is a strong and more innovative Europe. The third content is a fair Europe. The fourth is a sustainable Europe. The fifth is a Europe of security and common values. And the sixth content is an effective European Union for a rules-based international order anchored in partnership. So these are really the 6 priorities. Angela Merkel was in the European Parliament last week in the plenary, and she named 5 areas in her speech very similar to these 6: fundamental rights, solidarity and cohesion, climate change, digitalization, and Europe's role in the world.
Mm-hmm. You're saying that the expectations are too high, but on the other hand, I have read the plan of the presidency, and I would say that Germany is nothing but immodest. There is so much of plans packed in this program that I would say that Germany, that Berlin really believes it itself, that anything is doable, that it's possible really to implement all these targets. But I would also say that they're very much in line in what European Union's plans are. So it makes issues a little bit easier to be faced.
Well, I see in the first weeks of the German presidency, the top priority will, of course, be the multi-annual financial framework and the recovery plan for Europe. All eyes are now on the 17th and 18th of July, the next European Council, which, in my view, will be a first opportunity to find an agreement on all these major financial issues. We will see if the 27 heads of government can actually agree, but one thing is clear, we need an agreement sooner than later. So the sooner the better. And I think that if we don't find an agreement at this European Council, there should be another European Council in this summer so we can really start getting all the programs operational, because we need a speedy recovery. So the first few weeks will be very much focused on financial issues. I mean, it's always difficult to find an agreement on the multi-annual financial framework within the 27 member states and then dealing with the European Parliament, but we have to get it done, that's for sure. And in the second half of the German presidency, we will then be mainly dealing with the EU-UK relations. Next week, there will be another negotiating round. Both sides have agreed to intensify the talks, but we all know that, especially in September, October, we will be in a very crucial phase. Will we get an agreement or not? If we get an agreement, what does this mean for our future cooperation? And if we don't have an agreement, then we will have to step up our preparations for a no deal. So these are, from my point of view, the 2 big issues, among many, many others, what the Germans will try to play a constructive role. But finally, I think it's very important to underline, when it comes to preparing the European Council, Charles Michel is in the lead. It's his job as president of the European Council to talk to the 27 heads of government. And Angela Merkel is now the most experienced head of government in Europe. And she has this very special situation that she's actually already led a German presidency, incredible 13 and a half years ago. This is very, very seldom now that you will have a national leader who has already been through a presidency once.
One last very short question, because you mentioned that if there is no consensus achieved as regards MFF and recovery plan at this summit, if I understood well, you mentioned that there should be another one this summer. when would you see that happening?
Oh, and it's not up to me. I mean, I would prefer that we already find an agreement on the 17th or 18th of July, and this option still exists. I think we've seen in the last 24 hours some positive reactions coming from the Dutch Prime Minister and the Austrian Chancellor. But if we're all ready to finalize all these financial issues, we will have to say it's not up to me to suggest a new date for the European Council, but we need to find an agreement on general terms sooner than later, and all heads of government need to be fully aware of their responsibility, not only for their own country, but for the bigger picture, the whole of Europe. We need to show European solidarity, because this pandemic has shown that we were all hit hard by this pandemic, but some have been hit much harder than others. And that's why I'm saying this as a German Christian Democrat. I am fully aware that we need to show financial and economic solidarity with our partners in Spain, France, and Italy. We all know there are three issues which we still need a solution on: the volume and the proportion of the volume of the support, the proportion between grants and loans. We need an agreement on the allocation criteria, meaning the question for what this money should be spent and how much of it. And of course, we also need an agreement to the extent to which financial resources should be linked to reforms for economic growth in the country. So, last sentence, certainly extremely difficult negotiations lie ahead of the heads of government, but I do hope that the fundamental willingness for this basic concept will be evident.
I'm sure everyone hopes for that. Thank you very much, Mr. McAllister, for these replies. So now I would like to ask first Mr. Ambassador Jan Truszczyński. How would you assess the set of German priorities that Mr. McAllister introduced? Are they feasible in your view, and are they needed now?
Well, you know, every presidency dealing with the EU issues during the second semester has in practice only 4.5 months time in which to wrap up and conclude business. That's tall order, of course. But Germans are very well prepared. First, a highly experienced, trusted and respected leader of the government. Second, performance administration. In my active years in the European business, I have cooperated with a couple of successive German presidencies, and even now, I keep that in very fond memory. They are good. They know what is at stake, they know how it should be done, and so on. And most importantly, they do not overplay their hands. It's the biggest country in the European Union. They know it. But they tend to act as honest broker. They tend to act as facilitator. They do not break the other people's hands in order to get a deal as soon as possible. They are simply good. So I have trust in them. Second, they have picked a handful of targets, which everybody knows are the most important ones during the second half of 2020. And this is, of course, agreement on the next long-term budget. This is the agreement on how to get about the economic recovery in Europe, which instruments and how to use those instruments in order to get it. And third, why not, the crucial semester for the new relationship between the EU 27 and the United Kingdom. All the rest of the business, they have a full plate, of course, like everybody else before them, needs to be dealt with as well, but they will be measured and assessed by these three items: MFF, economic recovery plan, and economic recovery instruments, and certainly wrapping up a new deal with the United Kingdom, if ever. So, is it doable? Is it feasible? Regarding MFF and new generation instruments, we have seen a a lot of activity over the past several days. Key people contacting each other practically every day. Sanchez contacting Berlin, Conte contacting Berlin and The Hague, France contacting Rutte in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. People know what their responsibility is. People are aware that they will be also judged, not just the Germans, by their ability to get things done and to get a meaningful compromise. So even if they do not get there fully on the 17th and 18th of July, they will get there nonetheless, and they will get there soon thereafter. So, and in that sense, I have more than a bit of confidence in the ability of the German presidency to steer this whole process and to deliver in time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Professor Renata Mieńkowska, what about your confidence? What's your take on the German presidency priorities? Are the German presidency plans fit for the times? What a presidency can really do, in your view of a political scientist, by itself and within a trio? Oh, we don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having me in this discussion. At the very beginning, I would like to slightly disagree with Mr. Ambassador Truszczyński, who said, but on technicality, that Germany has actually 4.5 months to implement efficiently the ambitious priorities of the presidency. I would rather say they have 18 months since they act in a trio, and the trio of presidency, is not just, I would say, a kind of a facade. It really, in this particular case, means that Germany will have influence over what is going to happen in the European Union for the forthcoming 18 months. Why? Well, if you take a look at the trio priorities, they are all interconnected. It seems that we have more impact in Slovenian presidency on enlargement process and obviously Western Balkans. When we take into consideration Portugal, we rather see the social aspect. However, so the minimum wage and so on. However, if we take a look at the broader perspective of all three countries and all three periods of 6 months, we have Germany that will have to now deal with the most important aspects, namely, and here I will fully agree, on MFF, and this will be, I think, the toughest thing, on recovery from the post-pandemic, let's say, problems. And I would also say on navigating in a very difficult geography, or even I might say a very difficult situation, fluent situation among and politically dynamic situation within the EU as such, because we have divisions which are very difficult to defeat just by saying, okay, just do it, or during one summit. And therefore I would not say I believe in this summit that it will end up the process, although I realize that Germany, again, agreeing with both speakers, I would say that they're very efficient in what they are doing and how they are dealing with different interests. Plus, let's not forget, they also have Ursula von der Leyen. It's not without a meaning that it's a German representative. Another thing is that we have already had the agenda, I would say, set up by Franco-German deal. So I would say that we have three trio presidency countries. We have Ursula von der Leyen. Charles Michel is absolutely on the side of Germany in whatever they will try to achieve, because he knows that Angela Merkel will deal probably even better with trying to connect very different interests than himself. whatever we might, let's say about Charles Michel's abilities to really try to connect or to efficiently connect different interests. Plus, we have also, Ursula von der Leyen and basically, additionally, France. So if we take all this into consideration, we have quite a strong team to fight with the Frugal Four and to try to somehow deal with the populist part of the European Union. Because honestly, if I take a look at the European Union South, they basically agree with Germany on which direction to go generally. If they disagree, it's mainly technicalities. So we do not have a real problem with the European Union South. They know exactly that without Germany, they will simply not go through it fast enough to maintain, let's say, political stability. I'm also talking about Italy, and I would say that Italy is also a kind of the biggest potential ally of Germany, speaking about the MFF and recovery. I would say that if there is any real challenge in the German's presidency, it would be probably the European Union's East, not the South or the Frugal Four. And here, I would say my biggest concern is related to two things. Germany has, within the presidency priorities, has done something that was extremely difficult. Namely, it has connected ad hoc challenges and the way, or some ideas of defeating them, of facing them, with the long-term EU's, I would say, goals, which have already been set up with German involvement, but not only, namely with the Green Deal, obviously, with the biggest challenges in social, let's say, development, sustainable development of the European Union, and obviously with the EU after Brexit. So let's say the whole geopolitical setup and obviously also international, in a sense, China, US, and the EU. And now, if we take a look at what might undermine the whole concept, it's those countries, and Poland has already shown it can be a kind of a break, at least until it gets what it wants. And Poland, well, for 2 days, we already know that Poland means basically law and justice. But Poland might actually stop what it has already done. Mateusz Morawiecki was the one who basically stopped Poland, the conclusion of, let's say, the Green Deal. So it still is hanging somewhere above Angela Merkel's head and basically everyone's in the European Union who deals not only with Eurozone, but also with, let's say, the broader context. I would say that this would be the biggest challenge to, on the one hand, convince Poland to not to block the deal. On the other hand, to give Poland or those countries which might somehow hinder the process of facing those long-term challenges. It might be Hungary, but it might also be other countries which would see some particular interests. Therefore, Germany will hurry up with MFF so that these things, like the ad hoc, let's say, blockings, will not somehow undermine the long-term, the perspective of long-term goals. And the question is how Germany will basically defeat these particularities, these particular interventions into the European integration processes. And Poland will be probably one of the most important countries to deal with. If we take a look at the Eurozone, which is crucial for Germany to implement the long-term perspective goals, speaking about deepening the European integration, because all those ambitions that we have all mentioned, they're basically related to deepening the European Union's integration and trying to get more and more independent from the international situation. But obviously, it will not be possible if there are obstacles within the EU. So the question is how to deal with that, and at the same time provide for good conditions of strengthening the rule of law, or even bringing back the rule of law in those countries in which it has actually been hindered to an extent which can undermine the whole project, the EU, better integrated and post-pandemic EU. So I think that Angela Merkel obviously doesn't want to do any harm to Poland. That's obvious. She, as no one probably better in Germany, knows that it wouldn't be particularly wise. But at the same time, she can also not allow something that I, as a political scientist, know well from history and from my area, namely, if in any country, for the second term, both on the level of the parliament and on the level of the president having strong mandate, there are elected options which are autocratic or anti-democratic. Without a revolution, it will be very difficult to bring the country back to the democracy. So bearing this in mind, if EU doesn't do anything, it might mean that such countries as Poland or Hungary even less, I would say, but in the queue there are also Romania, Croatia much less because it will join the Eurozone, so it will be basically done. But maybe Lithuania, there are also many voices in Lithuania that politically it might be a little bit dangerous. What happened in Poland, it might also somehow become contagious in this area. So if we take all that into consideration, I think the biggest challenge for Germany is to somehow involve these countries also in the process of understanding that the European solidarity means not only particular interests, despite those, I would say, autocratic courses that those countries have, among them Poland, have actually picked up. And basically becoming also hostages of their own societies, extremely pro-European. So this is also, you know, it would be probably easier to somehow deal with a country that is anti-European. It's much more difficult to deal with the autocratic government in the EU member state, which is very pro-European. And this is the case in Eastern Europe. For the moment, very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mieńkowska. So we will come back still to the rule of law topic, a very interesting one, especially for our viewers, probably ones from Poland. But now I would like to return to the issue, another priority is of the German presidency, and to look into the issue of German leadership. So I would like to come back to Mr. McAllister and ask, does Germany want to take more decisive lead over the EU? And do you think it is possible to transfer its own stability over to Europe?
Well, first of all, as a Christian Democrat and a great admirer of Helmut Kohl, and without Chancellor Kohl, German unification wouldn't have been possible as it happened, and also the reunification of Europe, bringing Western and Eastern Europe together. Helmut Kohl always said, what we need and what we want and what we will fight for is a European Germany. And what we don't need is a German Europe. And we, I think, across political lines in Germany, take this very seriously. Germany is fully aware that we are the largest country in the European Union. Ambassador Truszczyński pointed this out, and that we have to play a very constructive role as the largest country and the country with the strongest economy. But Germany, as all other EU member states, must be fully aware that our future lies in a united Europe. We are economically now so interlinked that we will only get through this pandemic all together. What we have seen since the pandemic broke out in March is how much we are now actually interconnected and interlinked. And I think a lot of our fellow citizens weren't really aware of the hundreds of thousands of people who cross European national borders every day to go to their work or every weekend, and the delivery and supply chains in the single market, which make open borders so necessary. So German leadership is always together with France. What we've seen in the last few weeks is also that Franco-German cooperation isn't everything in Europe. And I know that sometimes the other 25 member states are quite critical of France and Germany being too active, too heavily dominating. But on the other hand, if there is no Franco-German initiative, then things hardly move forward. And the Commission proposal for the Economic Recovery Fund is based, at least partially based, on the joint initiative presented by Angela Merkel and President Emmanuel Macron. So Germany will lead from behind, always in close cooperation with France, but we also try to treat every member state equally. We have small, medium, and large-sized countries in the European Union, but we are an organization and a family of 27 equals. And I think that is also very important. And this is what Europe is all about, in the end, finding compromise and consensus, which are beneficial for all 27 member states. And if I talk about Franco-German initiatives,
exactly, I wanted to ask the subsidiary question.
Yeah, well, I just
about its extension.
The Weimar Triangle. I believe in the concept of the Weimar Triangle. I regret in the moment that there aren't Franco-German Polish initiatives, but we have to take note that in the moment Poland has a government which obviously has different views on the further development of the European Union, as previous governments had, especially under Donald Tusk.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, coming back to German leadership. So already Mr. McAllister outlined that Germany maybe wouldn't say that it would like to lead, but it would lead from the back seat in a way, but with all the 27 member states treated as equals. So I have a question to you about high expectations as regards this leadership still. Is German position strong enough to lead Europe towards effective recovery?
Yes, just like Mr. McAllister, I believe in leading from behind. Being the largest country and the largest economy brings certain responsibilities and imposes a certain, I would say, modus operandi. And Germans have been very adept at doing that over the last several decades. And it is exactly the same nowadays. I fully agree that without innovation, without resourcefulness, without new ideas, it's hard to push forward European integration in whatever area. And in that context, cooperation between Paris and Berlin has always been extremely helpful. I stress the word extremely helpful. But on the other hand, it is clear that when they were starting a discussion on whatever issue, they were departing from different points of view. They had different ideas, and on their way, they had to come closer to each other. And during this process, other countries could easily find themselves either German or the French position and accompany those two countries on the way towards a Franco-German compromise view and subscribe to that compromise view. This is how it worked on many occasions in the past. I see no reason why it should not be working nowadays as well. Having said that, I have to add that, of course, Germans, and I know them, are fully aware they need to take other people on board as well. We are 27, we are equal, and in the European Council, we need consensual solutions, right? In the Council, we need a qualified majority and obtained in such a way as not to do excessive harm to those who are proponents of a different view, to the minority, therefore. And Germans have here again been always very mindful of that. I mean, I don't want to give them, the best notes across the field.
You have already done that.
I have already done that, perhaps. Germanophile, you might say, even. I don't know. But in any case, I have trust in their ability to get things done, and I have trust in their experience on how to do it, and in their mindset, which tells them you must not impose your view on the others. You must bring them to accept increasingly what you are proposing. And in order to do that, you must be, as I say, inventive, resourceful. You must come forward with meaningful, interesting ideas. If you don't do that, then of course you have no position to claim as leader of the pack, and there is no leadership. And all these things need to be intertwined and combined and converge towards a meaningful process. And I think the Germans are exactly doing that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Actually, I will also turn back to this note in the next question that I will ask you. But now I would like to ask a similar question to Professor Mieńkowska. So I asked Mr. McAllister, does Germany want to lead? Mr. Ambassador, can it lead? And I would like to frame this leadership question in a different way to you. So do you think that for the Polish perspective, Germany should take the stronger lead, actually, because German presidency wants to take decisive steps against anti-Semitism, against anti-Gypsies, while in Poland, I would talk more about anti-Germanism. That is the problem. How do you see that?
Yes, there is certainly anti-Germanism. Whoever watched the Polish news in the public TV for the last few weeks knows exactly that there was absolutely no minute without it. But I think that that the problem has actually been visible for a longer time already. So since 2015, probably. There was a systemic, I would say, anti-Germanism in Poland. I still remember my colleague, actually, from the university and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, who said once that in the European Union there are three institutions actually leading, and this is German Chancellor, German Constitutional Tribunal, and German Minister of Economy. So taking this into consideration, this extremely I would say, fear of German domination, one could actually ask, okay, if not this, then what? In Poland, there are different, I would say, ideas of how to influence the EU, but there are absolutely no ideas how to, what to do with the European integration, particularly when we face such challenges. So yeah, there was one idea when Jarosław Kaczyński actually claimed that he employed some experts to write a new treaty of the European Union, but that was obviously more funny than serious. You are absolutely right that there are things which, there are aspects which will be problematic for Poland in German presidency, and there will be two things, I would say, mostly, namely connecting the EU funds distribution with the rule of law. And the second thing will be asylum policy. I'm more than sure that the European, the presidency trio, maybe not Germany itself, because it will launch the process, but the presidency trio will definitely deal with this topic because it's crucial. Namely, there will be some idea of how to organize the whole migration, and most probably there will be main rules introduced, like, I don't know, not the first country that refugee actually gets into, but maybe whatever country within the EU will have to deal with the asylum and the refugee status and so on. There are ideas which are operational, but the problem is still there. So Poland will definitely have its say here, and we might actually suppose what this say will be. And it will be against Germany, which has a totally different view of this question. Obviously, there will be also a huge debate over connecting the EU funds distribution with the rule of law. It's been there for a few months already, since this should be a regulation. Regulation doesn't require unanimity, so there is no problem about that. But the problem is that there are some legal problems over achieving this goal of rule of law by using totally different approach of simply distributing the funds. So there is no clarity over that. And I know also from the Court of Justice of the European Union that they see some problems around it. And if countries started questioning this regulation, it might end up in real chaos, I would say, over it. So it has to be well prepared, extremely well prepared. Another thing is that you see there is a problem of attitudes. As a political scientist, I can not only see the systemic, let's say, aspect of the things, but also what hides behind. And look what happened in Poland for the last years. There's a research done by Institute of Public Affairs, this German-Polish barometer, that for the last years, much more, of course, much more Polish perceive the Germans in a bad way, or this, I would say, pro-German attitudes. They are now much weaker. But there is another thing which is visible, namely, the business area is quite fine. So cooperation of businesses in Poland and Germany are fine. I would say the regular contacts of the societies are also fine, maybe apart from the last 2 months when we had this these problems on the border, simply Polish-German border. There are 123,000 people living of actually just crossing the border every day or almost every day. So we can imagine what scope of problems it's caused. But, and basically it was related also with other borders, but this one has suffered a lot. And what we have faced is that apart from those areas, the question of history, of the past, has started actually playing much bigger role than ever. So if we start perceiving the Germans, we as the Polish, I'm Polish, only through the lens of the past, it cannot bring anything good for the future, while this, unfortunately, is the case now. So there is a problem of perception of attitudes of the societies. So this is a strong signal to Germany, but also to the whole European Union. Germany, yes, it has to lead from behind, I don't know, from backseat, but the whole EU has to work on the new communication policy to strengthen its picture, but also to prevent from all those, I would say, revengist and resentment-based approaches of the member states towards each other, of the regions towards each other. This is one of the biggest challenges. It has been faced already by the European Commission, partly. As a Team Europe, Mr. Truszczyński and me, we are actually working on this operationally, you know, obviously on micro scale. But the problem is there. So the question is also how Angela Merkel will, first of all, deal with the whole image, with the PR, with the political marketing, because obviously she has a lot of goodwill for the whole European Union to get better integrated, to involve the societies even where in those countries where we have autocratic, let's say, ambitious, or it has already happened like in Poland or in Hungary, I mean, the autocratic type of government. But the problem is how to do it from communication point of view. So it will have to be a huge work of the whole European Union, of the whole European Union services, institutions, all member states which are pro-European. It can begin with like Prime Minister of Luxembourg said, I have a problem as a prime minister with visiting Poland, with diplomatic relations with Poland as a gay. You know, these are just details, they are just symbols. But the presidency of Germany in the European Union is based on the Mobius stripe. So if we take this into consideration, it's trying to get...
Sorry. Mr. McAllister, could you please mute your microphone? Maybe better when it's not you're not speaking, okay? Because we are hearing what you are saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, but yeah, but just
and that's not a problem. Just if you could mute your Zoom.
Yeah, I would just finish with those symbolic things, because I think that the German presidency might also become extremely symbolic, in a sense that it could bring some new fresh set of symbols for the European Union's integration, which are much more based on the future than on the past. But this is very difficult to be done, of course. It's done through symbols like like the Mobius stripe. That's of course a different thing, but although it belongs to that. But like the Green Deal, the common future, the next generation, this orientation towards next generation, these are phrases, these are symbols which might be a source of importance. But the question is how they will be played also by the EU itself, and to what extent it will be prevented that the populist governments will use them against deepening European integration and against German responsibility. Because even if we say, okay, maybe the German leadership over the whole European Union is a bit risky, but without German responsibility, and now I'm coming back a little bit to 2011 Berlin speech of Radosław Sikorski, it's very difficult to imagine any, let's say, possibility of facing the future challenges of the EU.
Thank you very much. Although I have so many questions to you, I see that our viewers, our co-participants have their own questions. So I will start asking them now. So first question from Mr. Moritz Rem to Mr. McAllister. Should the next generation EU funds be linked to economic reform in the receiving member states, and what sort of reform should be undertaken? Important question.
Okay, well, why I was speaking my introductory words, I was referring to the obstacles which still lie in front of us to find an agreement among the 27 member states, especially the so-called frugal four, which in some cases are actually frugal five, because Finland has joined them. Obviously, Prime Minister Rutte from the Netherlands is the kind of the lead spokesperson of this group. In the end, it will be about the linkage of the recovery fund to economic reforms. But this shouldn't only be a matter for the four frugals, but this should be in all of our interest. We are going to invest huge amounts of money, sums which were totally incredible just a few months ago, but we have to pay attention what they will be invested for, and it has to be in line with the overall policy strategy of the European Union. It's about the further digitalization of our economy. It's about the European Green Deal. It's about cross-border infrastructure, just to name three important political fields. And of course, it always has to be an investment in the future. How can we make our national economies, and that means the whole single market, more competitive in increasingly challenging global times? So that is really what it is all about. And there's another point which I would like to underline, which is also important, that we also need to already discuss now the repayment of the loans. It's well known that the European People's Party and my political group are in favor that we already start with repaying smaller amounts of the loans already in the term of the next multi-annual financial program. That means starting latest 2027, 2028. So that's what it's really all about. It's about long-term, future-proof investments in all member states. And of course, this will have to be there will need to be some kind of oversight and scrutiny. The European Parliament will have to play a role, the member states will have to play a role, and also the European Court of Auditors.
Okay, now the question from Jakub Wojcik. I will probably ask it to Ambassador Jan Truszczyński and to Mr. McAllister. So first, what can Western Balkan countries expect from the German presidency? Will the accession process be accelerated or remain slow? Will Germany ensure a progress in Serbia-Kosovo-Albania relations? And how will negotiations with North Macedonia go? So a multi-layered question. Maybe we'll start from Jan Truszczyński and then Mr. McAllister. You can see this question also in the Q&A part. And Truszczyński disappeared, so okay. Sorry.
Should I start? Yes.
Please start. Yes.
Yes. Well, I have to admit, I have to confess, I didn't hear the question.
What can Western Balkan countries
bits and pieces. The connection was bad, but I more or less have an idea what the question was about. Well, let me tell you this. Well, of course, one should expect the launch of the negotiations soon with Northern Macedonia and with Albania. Whether it shall take place still under the German presidency, I don't know. I have not looked at the agenda of the German presidency. I have not scrutinized it in detail. But the negotiating framework seems to be largely agreed already, right? At the level of the EU ambassadors. So the launch will be made later this year still. Chances are there will be some progress in talks between Kosovo and Serbia, supported by France, supported by Germany. And so there will be some additional assistance to our Western Balkan partners using the financial instruments available both within the MFF and within other EU financial instruments. So all in all, there will be progress, but on the other hand, this progress will remain slow. The countries of the Western Balkans have not been particularly fast in terms of reforms, rule of law, in terms of moving away from state capture, and so on and so forth. If you look at the progress made on this,
we experienced some troubles.
Negotiating areas, negotiating. Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you. Yeah.
Very little progress, and I wouldn't expect a big acceleration during this semester. Neither do I expect things to be rolled out much faster in the course of next years. It will remain slow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Now, Mr. McAllister, from the side of Germany and German presidency, how do you see that? The Western Balkans, yeah.
Well, for the last years, German policy has been to support the further credible prospect of accession for all 6 Western Balkan countries to the European Union. Angela Merkel personally has been involved in the so-called Berlin process. And to bring these countries closer to the European Union isn't only in the interests of the Western Balkan countries, it's also in our own EU strategic interest, because we know only a policy of regional stability, reconciliation, and better relations among these countries can guarantee security and stability for the whole continent of Europe. So what do I expect in the German presidency? The negotiations with Serbia and Montenegro are ongoing. Perhaps it will be possible to open further chapters, especially when it comes to Serbia. However, this depends a lot on the progress which has to be done on the ground in Serbia. And the other issue is, will the negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania officially start? Now all eyes are on the elections in Northern Macedonia, and we will know in a couple of days, when the votes have been counted, who we will be dealing with in Skopje as the next government. I think people are quite positive in Berlin that we will be able to have this conference to officially start the accession negotiations with North Macedonia. I think this is overdue, and we should really give this country credit that they went this courageous step to change their name as a symbol of good neighborly relations and reconciliation with Greece. With Albania, perhaps it will also be possible. There are 15 conditions which have been formulated, and these 15 conditions need to be implemented, totally fulfilled on the ground. And in the moment, there are still some hiccups between the government and the opposition as regards, for instance, the reform of the electoral law. So we will see, we can also progress in Albania. A final remark, the unresolved situation between Serbia and Kosovo remains a potentially destabilizing factor for the entire Western Balkans. And that's why it is of huge importance for all of us that we actually make progress. I very much welcome, after another Franco-German initiative with President Macron and Chancellor Merkel in the lead, both sides have now agreed to resume the dialogue facilitated by the European Union. It will start on Thursday here in Brussels. President Vučić will come from Belgrade, and Prime Minister Hoti will come from Pristina. We need to make progress. I know that this is very, very complex issue. I was the rapporteur for the EU-Serbia negotiations in the last term, and I've often been to Belgrade and Pristina, but I do hope that both sides now understand that it is also in their interest that we further normalize the relations so that in the end, not only these 2 countries, but all 6 countries of the Western Balkans can continue their voyage towards EU membership. Of course, at different speeds. This is a regatta, not a convoy, but I am firmly convinced that all 6 Western Balkan countries should have a European perspective. And the final sentence, if we as Europeans don't get involved in the Western Balkans, other forces are just waiting to use our weaknesses. I'm talking about Russia, I'm talking about China, I'm talking about Turkey, I'm talking about Arab countries. It's in our own hands if we can really support these European nations on their European journey. And that's why the German government is well advised to continue their strong engagement in these regional issues.
I think it's nothing to persuade us Poles because we totally agree. Our government agrees with this approach, and probably most of the Polish people as well. It's rather the thing to persuade to the French leadership. One very little sub-question to that one. I would like to ask you about this decoupling, because North Macedonia and Albania are treated as a couple, and it's often to the disadvantage of North Macedonia. Is it discussed at all by anyone that they might be treated separately?
Well, I believe that the policy of one size fits all, or one size even fits two, doesn't work practically. I think all countries in the Western Balkans should be regarded individually. By the way, it's the same with the Eastern Partnership. We also had this idea that we would have one size fits all for the 6 countries in the Eastern Partnership. No, all countries are developing very differently. They have different governments, they have different parliamentary majorities. In the Western Balkan, it was important that North Macedonia and Albania both got the green light in the end of all 27 member states. And I must say, I found it very disappointing last year that 3 member states vetoed the promised accession, the start of the accession negotiations, but we've revised the methodology, and then France, Denmark, and the Netherlands were ready. And now we have to move forward. What I just see is that North Macedonia has done its homework, whereas Albania still has certain homework to do. So it mainly depends in the hands of the Albanian government and the Albanian parliament if they are ready to do these reforms. If not, then we will move forward with North Macedonia first.
I like this.
But on the other hand, just since we're having elections in North Macedonia, and you've seen that, for instance, the name issue is still quite controversially debated in this country.
And
if you have a different parliamentary majority in Skopje, who knows what will happen then? So I just believe that when it comes to North Macedonia, I thought it was very courageous of what the Prime Minister then did in the Prespa agreement. And this was one of the few really positive news coming from the Western Balkans in the last 12, 18 months. And I wish we would have many more positive developments and positive news from the Western Balkans.
Thank you very much. So now I have 2 questions to Professor Renata Mieńkowska. Maybe I will pose them together because they're slightly interconnected. One refers to what we've already said, to what you've already said about the Polish-German relations. So you very well diagnosed the problems and quoted research on that. But we still need constructive movements on how to deal with the situation. So the question from Wojciech Warski, also the member of Team Europe, is in which practical way can German presidency influence and shape relations with Polish government, which seems to continue its Poland great again policies in contradiction to the EU? And the second question is about the rule of law again. So right now, the EU, from Julianna Boczkowska, right now, the EU is facing one of its deepest crises. Is it the right time? Is it the right time to discuss the rule of law conditionality when we have so many other problems?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So these are very interesting questions. And you see, if the answer was easy, I wouldn't sit here, but I would be probably a well-paid advisor of, I don't know, Ursula von der Leyen, our German Chancellor, better paid than the Warsaw University professor. But honestly, I think that there are 2 at least layers of the questions. One of them is what Angela Merkel can do, speaking about the presidency, and what she could do representing Germany. On the other hand, what she could do on the level of the European Union and how she could contribute to the general, I would say, effort to connect somehow this question of European values to the question of business as usual, speaking about economic relations within the EU. And so I will begin maybe with the latter, namely, you see, Poland and Germany, we have really a lot of common interests, both bilaterally as well as on the level of the European Union within the EU. Just to mention the question of globalization after pandemics. Shortening the supply chains means basically taking the production from China and bringing it somewhere to Europe. What does this mean? It means taking it by Germans and bringing it to Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, whatever, where it's cheaper. This is in the interest of Poland. I mean, we obviously can say there are problems around it, but basically, as such, it's in our common interest. Minimum wage. It's a very brave idea, but this is absolutely doable, and I think it will be done. Obviously, with some conditionality. In different countries, it will be measured differently, blah, blah. But basically, I think it will happen. And I would say rather sooner than later. Then we are allies. We actually were already allies before even the German presidency and before the German-French ideas about the European Union. We were in a common alliance regarding the European Union's competition policy. The EU's, particularly European Commission's competition policy is extremely strict, I would say. And Poland, together with Germany and together with France, was actually in the same alliance regarding the competition policy now, which is one of the core, I would say, aspects of the single market. So we had really common interests, and particularly the latter might have made us real allies in, let's say, trying to make these ideas on how the EU's integration should be deepened a little bit more down to earth, and we might have cooperated with Germany. If not, and here I come to the second layer, if not the symbolic questions and symbolic areas. And here we have a real problems because Germany, bearing in mind that we have so many common interests, that we have a great economic cooperation, that we are interdependent, even if Poland is much more dependent on Germany than the other way around. It's still not really in Germany's interest to lose Poland as a partner, trade partner, whatever other partner regarding business, even if we break some meaningful initiatives for Germany, like Nord Stream 2, for example. But this might also bring a new perspective to some aspects of German domination in the EU, domination understood in a positive way, in a sense that it's the biggest country, the most meaningful. I mean, okay, shall you want to mean more in the EU, become stronger in the EU, not say, oh, I don't want to deal with this or with that. This is not how business is done. But speaking about the symbolic area, the most important question is whether Poland could really show that we do respect the European Union's values. And even if there are the largest problems with the rule of law, which is in fact the most important, I would say this is something that might be dealt with in longer perspective. I would say this is the most destructive for Poland, that's for sure. So the fact that Law and Justice has conquered the courts, which will definitely undermine also the process of distribution of the EU funds. Same story will be, and I absolutely think it will be the case, when Law and Justice will start manipulating self-governments in a way that it will give more money to those which are in Law and Justice's hands, give hardly any money from the budget for those which aren't, by creating operational, let's say, tools for distributing EU funds much more centralized rather than decentralized. We can share our tiny secret with Karolina that yesterday we spoke about it a little bit, that the Polish funds within the previous perspective, they were designed by operational programs in Poland and by existence of regional programs, they were designed as decentralized, which strengthened the regions basically. And now most probably Law and Justice will reverse the process, which will be, I would say, killing of those self-governments which will not have, let's say, a policy in line with Law and Justice, or which will not fulfill the expectations of Law and Justice, or which might become, let's say, the sources of opposition, I would say, resistance. So bearing all that in mind, of course, Angela Merkel and German presidency on the level of the EU will have to somehow intervene, because otherwise the common values will become only a facade behind which everyone just does what they want. So basically what she might contribute to is common definition of all those values. And she can do it because there was a problem with solidarity. What did the Polish say, or particularly the Polish government? Okay, we should be solidary with, let's say, the problems of the South, fine. But on the other hand, even if we are not in the Eurozone and so on, we haven't contributed to the crisis, the one 2008-12 that much. On the other hand, Germany is not solidary with us by being so involved in Nord Stream 2, although they know exactly how painful this question is for us. And now, of course, if we have this kind of rhetorics, people start thinking, and particularly the societies and also other governments, they start thinking how to make a deal out of this quarrel, I would say, how to contribute from those different understandings of solidarity. Same story with subsidiarity, although it's much better defined, I would say, but also rule of law. Ask Viktor Orban, he will tell you he's stuck to the rule of law. Or ask the Polish government, they would say, oh, we are perfectly fine about the rule of law, we just understand it in a different way. If there are common definitions of common values, then there are no problems with different understanding. Of course, it's not Angela Merkel's deal to say how to understand things, but it's her deal to make the whole effort credible. So she has to show that Germany and Poland and Hungary and Spain or Italy can understand solidarity exactly the same way. We help each other if we are in troubles. So we have to make the whole process credible. If we do, then we can speak about business as usual, not being still threatened by the problem, the question of different understanding of the values. But honestly, as I said, I'm very cautious and I'm absolutely scared about what might happen in Poland within the next 3 years, and also from political scientist point of view, because believe me, it will be extremely difficult now to bring Poland back to the rule of law. So Poland will might be a sort of we might try to make Poland big again, but to of course without particular result. But to make Poland democratic again will be extremely difficult. Fully democratic in this understanding of democracy that we know from the EU's Article 2 of the European Union's Treaty. So if we take all this into consideration, what Germany could do, well, it could act twofold. So really protect business as usual and strengthen the good image of the EU within German society and Polish society, the Polish good image within the German society, so among businesses and so on, there where it's possible in these areas. On the other hand, she should basically, speaking about German Chancellor, she should raise the question of the common values on the level of the EU and act solidarily with other member states to protect the Polish society from the Polish government if necessary. This is nothing unusual in the EU. Very commonly, European Union, that's the specificity of the EU, that it protects EU citizens from their own governments sometimes, if it's necessary. Speaking about protection of minorities' rights, speaking of democracy, so speaking of all that, which is the core of values of the EU, and which is the something that makes the EU different from other international organizations.
Thank you. On the other hand, we have seen that speaking about common values on the EU level has often turned out counterproductive in a way that these governments that are treated as right-wing populists had manipulated that information against Brussels and haven't changed their way of acting. So on that note, I would like to ask a question to Mr. McAllister. Rule of law conditionality has been slightly diluted in the general EU discourse, so that even Polish government agrees for it, although it used to be our total red line. So the question is, just a second, because I had a quote from Angela Merkel, yes, here. So Chancellor Angela Merkel, on the other hand, frames the recovery fund as a political instrument against populists. So did the European Union resign from a rule of law conditionality and now tries to change, to transfer the problem of democratic governance into fighting inequalities? How to understand that?
Well, I agree with Professor Mieńkowska-Norkiene that the European Union is not only an economic community, it's a community of shared values. The rule of law, democracy, human rights, the freedom of speech, media freedom, just to name a few. This is what brings us together in the European Union. And it goes without any saying at all that these principles should never be put into question, as stated in the preamble of the Treaty of the European Union. Now, we see some deficiencies in some member states, and I believe that these deficiencies must be addressed directly, and every member state of the European Union should be committed to protecting these values. In this week, a lot of German ministers are in the European Parliament presenting the priorities of the German presidency. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas was in the Foreign Affairs Committee, which I chair, on Monday. And he also got questions on this issue. And Heiko Maas was very clear in saying that Germany fully supports the new peer review on the rule of law. This includes country-specific peer reviews, which provide an additional instrument complementary to the Article 7 procedures, which are currently ongoing against Poland and Hungary. The first rule of law report is expected in September, and the German presidency, as he pointed out, envisages to have the first debate in the Council at the end of the year. Now, it says in the text of the program of the German presidency regarding your question, let me just quote, "Compliance with rule of law standards in the EU and its member states is also a basic prerequisite for the correct use of funding from the EU budget. We therefore support the Commission's proposal to make EU budgetary funding conditional on respect for rule of law standards in the member states." So this echoes the position we have taken in the European Parliament with a broad majority, but we also believe that there should be a connection between the multi-annual budget of the EU on the one hand and the rule of law on the other hand. Angela Merkel, for good reasons, said in the European Parliament, we need to be guided more than ever by fundamental rights. And this applies throughout the whole world, and it also applies within the European Union. So I understand, of course, we need unanimous agreement of all 27 member states. And I know that there's hard work in front of us, but I am happy to see that the German government is officially supporting the line we take here in the European Union. And obviously this position is also shared by at least some political actors in Poland, as I was happy to follow this morning. You are a great great country, and we do hope that Poland will go back to the line it had taken in all these very good years, that the rule of law and democracy belongs to all Polish citizens, 100%. We have some deficiencies and they need to be addressed, and the Polish government is aware of that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador disappeared. Mr. Ambassador, do you hear us? No. So I will ask the question to David McAllister again by Julianna Boczkowska. What are Germany's plans concerning EU-China relations? As a part of China is mentioned, but as I mentioned in the beginning, everything is mentioned in the priorities. So it doesn't mean so much.
On foreign policy, I would say the German presidency has set out 3 priorities. The first one I already mentioned, to start an accession conference, at least with North Macedonia, perhaps with Albania too. The second priority is to intensify relations with our neighboring continent, Africa, and the African Union. For the second half of the German presidency, it is still intended to start more collaborative talks on concrete joint initiatives on the European-African agenda. And the third priority will be to reassess our strategic relations with China. The future shape of our relations cannot be solely on a close trade cooperation. Yes, China is an important cooperation partner, but it's also an economic competitor and a systemic rival at the same time. We have to be fully aware of this, and there are profound differences when it comes to the rule of law, freedom, democracy, and human rights in the country. Unfortunately, the EU27 China summit in Leipzig, scheduled for mid-September under the German EU presidency, had to be postponed due to the COVID-19 crisis. This would have been a good approach and also a personal initiative of Chancellor Merkel to make clear that as an EU, we should always deal with the Chinese as an EU27, because this then underlines the power and the leverage we have. And the intention of this summit was to enhance political and economic ties and to create a better exchange by introducing a new approach. Now, this summit, which was supposed to take place for the first time in the format of 27 member states, can't take place. It might take place at a later stage. It really depends on the further development of the pandemic. But let me say, since I'm discussing this with representatives of Poland, I believe that this format, EU27 with China, is a better way forward than what we have seen in the last few years of the Chinese government held summits with groups of EU member states separately. I said that we are fundamentally divided in major questions, but still these differences shouldn't be an argument against exchange, dialogue, and cooperation with China. A final note, not only in the European Parliament, but also in member states, we are observing the developments in Hong Kong with great concern. This is a clear violation of the principle of one state, 2 systems, and it's also a breach of the Sino-British Agreement and other international law rules. And this has been addressed clearly, and it will continue to be addressed clearly. And I welcome that the Foreign Affairs Ministers' Council on Monday also prepared a statement for the High Representative Josep Borrell. China needs to understand that we have a huge potential for cooperation, but global human values, global values and global human rights are of big importance for us in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, glad to have you back. So now I would like to ask a question about the United States. How would you assess Donald Trump's decision to move out 1/3 of its troops away? Is it a good move to reposition part of these troops in other European countries, but only part of that number? And secondly, Central and Eastern Europe tries to use the Euro-American quarrels, for example, between Germany and USA, to improve their own relations with Trump's administration. Is it possible to maintain a single European approach to Washington? The question is asked by Michał Strzałkowski from the Polish radio.
Well, what can one say? First of all, I think that everybody is waiting for the outcome of this year's presidential elections. And the chances are the tide will turn ever so slightly, or maybe in a more energetic way, soon after this year's elections. So better times may be coming again for the cooperation between the US and the European Union. Second, regarding the recent decision by the president to move up to 9,500 troops out of Germany to other areas of Europe, of the world, many people perceive it as intended penalty meted out to specifically the German chancellor. He doesn't like her. He doesn't like Germany. He wants to penalize Germany. Strategically, it doesn't make any sense. Strategically, it's not in the interests of Europe. And the administration has also been taken by surprise, and no operational decisions, as far as I understand, have as yet been taken who to move out, where to go from Germany, and what the general strategic posture of the United States and strategic interest of the United States worldwide after the decision is implemented. I think we have final and full clarity on that. So the erratic decisions by the American president tend not to be implemented as expeditiously and as fully as some in Europe might perhaps wish. By some in Europe I mean the present Polish government and the reconfirmed Polish president. A clear case of people putting all their eggs in one basket. And this may come to cost official Poland. If we have a change in the United States, that will mean the need for the Polish government to reposition itself. Will it manage to do that? That is the big question, because many bridges have been burned between Warsaw and the other European capitals. The contribution of official Poland to the development of European foreign and defense policy has been lackluster, half-hearted, I would even say minimal. And this is detrimental to Poland's strategic interest. Much will depend on the political change in the United States later this year. If it comes, then we will be dealing with a new deck of cards. If it doesn't come, then it will mean further deterioration of the relationship overall and the increasing need for Europe to start thinking strategically and to develop its own strategic capability to act more decisively with more influence and with better results in relations with other strategic partners worldwide. So there is a choice of sorts, and there is some hope, and there is something that we should all be looking forward to, meaning the political change in the United States. I personally belong to those who believe this is increasingly possible. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sort of expecting it. But again, while increasingly optimist, we should not forget that things may also turn unexpectedly for worse, and Europe should be better prepared for that.
Thank you very much. And we have come to the close. It's 12:30. We have asked our guests. We have asked many questions, but actually there are more questions that we didn't manage to ask. And it's great that we'll have more debates about German presidency unfolding from September on, to which I will be inviting all of you. And we have managed successfully to answer the question from the title, can Germany make the post-corona EU great again? So the answer would be, who else if not Germany, but it will have to be the lead from behind. So thank you very much. Our distinguished panelists have been Mr. McAllister, David McAllister, thank you very much. Professor Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, thank you very much. And Ambassador Jan Truszczyński. And at the end, I would like to just say that this debate have been co-organized by EURACTIV Poland and Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Thank you very much and have a great day. And great presidency, Mr. McAllister. Thank you.
Thank you.